12 months since Saudi Arabia and its allies tried to cripple Qatar as the tiny Gulf nation weathered the storm. I'm Imran Garta and today's newsmaker is Qatar's blockade. 1 year ago, Saudi Arabia, along with Egypt, Bahrain and the UAE, severed all ties with Qatar and imposed a blockade on their former ally. The wealthy Gulf state was accused of supporting terrorism and was given a list of demands, including shutting down Al Jazeera. Doha refused, and the economic and financial toll was clear to see. Supermarket shelves were empty and children were pulled out of school. But 12 months on, Qatar says it's recovered, although relations between Riyadh and Doha have not. So, did the Saudi kingdom and its allies get all they wanted from the blockade, or has it been a failure? Caitlin McGee reports from the Qatari capital.
As one of the world's wealthiest nations, there are few things Qatar can't buy. In just a few decades, its vast gas reserves have fueled the transformation of its capital from a dusty desert port to a modern metropolis. But last June, it came across a problem that money couldn't solve. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt cut all diplomatic and trade ties with the Gulf state. Qatar was cut off, isolated, and it plunged the once brotherly unity of the Gulf states into disarray. The blockading countries issued a list of 13 demands in order to restore ties. Among them were orders to shut down the Al Jazeera news network, curb ties with Saudi's biggest regional rival Iran, and stop funding what they called terrorism. But 1 year on, Al Jazeera is still broadcasting. Qatar has strengthened its relationship with Iran, and Doha still denies funding terrorism. Here in the country's capital, Doha, resistance to the Gulf blockade has become an art form. Almost everywhere you look, portraits of the emir loom over the capital city. Many Qataris, like Dana al-Haddad, view it as a show of solidarity. The blockade was more than a political development to her, it was deeply personal, and her biggest fear was that it would force her family apart.
I
am half Qatari and half Bahraini. My mother is Bahraini. That was the thing that I was most worried about.
Her fears were never realised. The Qatari government kept granting Bahraini citizens visas so her relatives could still visit. But the siege stung in other ways. Most of Qatar's 2.6 million people are immigrants. Celine Baycum is one of them. She had to leave the country and her job working for a hotel in the first weeks of the blockade.
There was no guest in the hotel, there was no business. Even normally the hotels are likely like 100% occupancy, 90%, and at that time there was only like 5%. So no one was coming.
But in May, she decided to return.
And after 10 months, I just realized that nothing is actually changed. The blockade is still actually ongoing, but the business is actually stabilized.
The International Monetary Fund says Qatar's economy is expected to grow 2.6% this year. It's made efforts to find new trading routes and use its seaport more. And it injected billions of dollars into its banks to replace money that was being pulled out by banks in Saudi, the UAE, Bahrain and Egypt. Together, these measures have all provided a cushion for Qatar's economy and slowed any further financial damage. Qatar's relationship with Saudi Arabia has often been strained. Part of the reason are the territorial disputes. Another is the accusations that Saudi Arabia back in 1996 tried to oust the emir's father in a coup. Doha's ambition to build its global profile and carve out its own independent foreign policy also appears to have frustrated its neighbours. But now, as the blockade drags into its second year, both sides seem to have reached a deadlock, with no sign either side plans to do anything about ending it. Caitlin McGee, The Newsmakers in Doha.
Let's go now to Qatar's ambassador to Australia, Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, who joins us from Perth. Sir, pleasure having you on the program. 1 year on, this blockade is still in place. Are you a weaker country as a result of it?
Well, the blockade is still on in place, but after 1 year and 2 weeks, we are much better than last year. Qatar is in much better position politically, economically, morally, and though we are looking forward for a solution which will benefit the whole region. Our region is tired of being going from one crisis to another, and our goal in Qatar is really to have a stable and peaceful region.
Do you consider the Saudis and the Emiratis as your enemies?
We don't consider them our enemies. They are still our brothers. We have differences. We have a crisis. We don't like the way they try to treat us. They try to impose their will on us. They try to exploit their border with us. They treat us like enemies, but we will never look at them as our enemies.
We've had the Saudis from the king himself in a letter openly threaten Doha recently because Qatar wants to buy missiles from Russia, and the Saudis saying, quote, in such a situation, the kingdom would be ready to take all the necessary measures to eliminate this defense system, including military action. King Salman is essentially threatening to attack you. Are you worried about that?
Well, we heard of this information, but we are still waiting for confirmation from the French side. And, as to what type of weapon Qatar buys, that is a part of Qatar's sovereignty. We can buy weapons from anybody who will sell weapons to us, not to attack anybody, but to defend ourselves. And I am not worried about threat from the Saudis or any other country in the Gulf.
Mr. Ambassador, do you have any regrets about Qatar's policies that led up to the blockade? Did Qatar get it wrong in any way?
Every country makes mistakes, but concerning this blockade, Qatar have done nothing wrong to be treated that way. Qatar was acting within its own sovereign rights, according to international law, within the obligation of the Charter of the United Nations, and for others to try to steal our sovereignty, to impose their will, to threaten us, and at the same time to try to exploit us and to ask us for payment because of their political and economic failures in their countries and in their regions. That was not our fault. That is the fault of the blockading countries. And I think they tried to push us in a way, expecting that we will accept their demands. But after 1 year and 2 weeks, where are we? They are the loser, and we are still in our place. We did not accept their demands. We will not accept their demands, and all their 13 points are void in terms of politics, in terms of international law, in terms of the United Nations charters, and in terms of the friendly relation between states. So I think it is they who should be sorry for the act which they have done against Qatar. And Qatar is doing what is within its own right to protect its independence, sovereignty, and the interests of its people.
Tell me, sir, very finally about your new friendships over the past year, those you had to lean on and rely on during the blockade.
Well, we appreciate all our friends. We appreciate the role which was played by everybody, starting with Kuwait and this position, and Oman, Turkey and Iran, and the United States, and Britain, and France, Germany, and many, many countries in the world. I think Qatar today has more friends internationally than the blockading countries. So we really appreciate what everybody have done. But today we are more resilient. We are sure of ourselves. We opened many windows of opportunities for our people, and also opportunities for our friends to cooperate together. And for that reason, we are very thankful, and we are very sure of our position today. Qatar is a small country, but it has great ideas, and it has resilient leadership, strong population. They have proud, and they are intelligent, highly educated. And I think, after 1 year, I think we passed the test.
Ambassador Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, I thank you very much for joining us once again on the Newsmakers. Let's broaden out this discussion now. From Doha, I'm joined by Sultan Barakat. He's the founding director of the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies. And in Riyadh, we have Saudi Affairs Specialist Ahmed Al Ibrahim. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Ahmed, let me begin with you. You just heard me speaking to Qatar's ambassador to Australia. He's saying 1 year on, they're the losers. We are still in our place. All 13 points are void. He's confident that Qatar is still strong 1 year on. What do you think?
I think he's absolutely wrong. I think if you check the balance, and if you bring the Morgan Stanleys and the McKinseys and the PwC, they're going to tell you the facts. What happened to Qatar in the past year? What happened to Qatar Airways? What happened to the all foreigner people who's in Qatar? What happened to their GDP? How many billions and billions of dollars they actually acquired in bonds? The whole economy went down. I'm not a financial guy. Qatar is hurting. And we have 13 mandates for Qatar to accept. We are not asking them to be our little kitty that we take out. We are telling them to be a full-fledged country that respects the international communities, that stop funding terrorism, to stop funding everybody who actually shake up the GCC countries, and from Morocco to Iraq to Iran to Syria to Qaeda to Hezbollah to Houthis. They are all over the place. They are a big web. So what happened in the past year, actually, when we shut the light on Qatar, a lot of advancement actually happened in Qatar. They are more into terrorism than before. They are less in funding terrorism than before. They are actually trying to come up and talk to leaders in the world and try to come up from their dirty closets into the light a little bit. This is what the 4 countries are doing who actually applied the blockade in Qatar. We share a lot of social fabric with the Qatari people. We feel pity for them. It's a country with $400 billion and 300,000 population. They have a lot of money, yes, but that's not the case. Why the blockade has happened is about national security.
Let's take what you said. So, Sultan, Ahmed making the point, he's saying even though the Qataris are not playing ball with the 13 points, 1 year on, maybe inadvertently, they've stopped some of the behavior that the Saudis don't like. So that's seen as a success, and the Qatari economy has been weakened. Is that how you see it, Sultan?
I don't think there's been any success in this episode. I don't think, and I'm really surprised to hear anyone from Saudi Arabia claiming that Qatar hurting is a good thing, or any other Arab country. This whole thing has been disastrous for everyone concerned. It is true that there has been a large, considerable financial cost for Qatar in this, but it's also true that this expenditure has, in fact, helped Qatar consolidate itself, particularly in terms of its internal front. I think, by and large, the population has mobilized around its emir, and if anything, the situation, the conditions inside are stronger than ever before, and as such, they are much more determined not to give up on any aspect of their sovereignty. Which is what the Saudis and the other boycotting countries are requiring.
Right.
Regionally, I think Qatar is probably in a stronger position as well. It's not only Qatar who's concerned about the strange, some would say erratic behavior of Saudi Arabia over the last few years. Kuwait is worried, Oman is worried. Of course, now with the Americans withdrawing from the Iran deal, there's a major concern. So the concerns that Qatar faces are not only limited to Qatar. There are many other countries in the Gulf who are concerned, and beyond the Gulf. You know, the policies that they pursued in Lebanon with holding the Prime Minister, the current policies with Jordan, you can see
so there's a bunch of things here.
Is on the edge of failing, and the policy that the Saudis are applying to it. So aside from the war in Yemen and so on, so there is a major, I think, bigger question that the Saudis need to address, of which Qatar is only one aspect of it. And it's very difficult for
allow me to bring Ahmed
to quite understand why all of this is taking place.
Okay, I want him to respond to this. So, Ahmed, Sultan's saying, you guys have just strengthened them. They've consolidated, they've become more self-sufficient, they've become more confident in their policies. They've got options, perhaps with Tehran and Ankara and so forth. It has backfired, hasn't it?
Didn't backfire, actually. Again, Qatar it's a tiny problem. It's our least of our problems. We have a bigger problem. We have Iran. We have the war in Yemen. We have our brothers and sisters in Syria. We have Iraq. We have a lot of things. And I'm not going to throw the book on Mr. Sultan and bring some information from WikiLeaks or anything like that. I'm talking facts over here. Qatar, it's a very minor problem. The only sympathy we have for Qatar, it's the Qatari citizens who are suffering because of all that. If the Qatari people actually went on their emir just because he hired his own personal bodyguards from the Revolutionary Guard from Iran, or he actually takes 6,000 military personnel from Turkey to support him and to get him his security, I'm not going to answer in that way. I'm going to leave the record actually correct itself when we go further. If he's saying that on the first year, I doubt if they're going to continue with this blockade, we're going to hear of a country called Qatar in 5 years, because it will not survive. I hope the Qatari emirs and the Qatari government comes to the unity of the GCC countries, come to Kuwait, come to Bahrain, come to Sultanate Oman, come to Saudi Arabia. The GCC countries going to continue. Qatar is irrelevant to the GCC.
So let's ask
contribute
Sultan.
Except Satan,
Sultan,
or they never
Sultan, there's a
actually
point.
did any proactive anything.
Ahmed, let me ask him. So Sultan, within 5 years, Ahmed's saying, if Qatar continues down this path, it won't even exist. Maybe it'll be swallowed up by its neighbors. The GCC will survive, Qatar will not. Is that even plausible in your eyes?
Look, I'm not here to defend the position of Qatar, but listening to my friend Ahmed, this is the core of the problem, is the rhetoric that he and other analysts have been throwing around. There are very few facts that are being addressed objectively. To say, for example, that the Emir has Revolutionary Guard securing him, or I don't know, 6,000 Turkish soldiers are based in Qatar. This is all nonsense. The Turkish troops in Qatar do not exceed 400, and they're largely training troops. The average age is probably 35 or so, and they are limited in what they can do. What is important for Qatar is the link to Turkey. So it's Turkey's commitment to stand by Qatar internationally, as other countries have also expressed their commitment to do the same. Now, looking into the future, I think just objectively and looking at it from a distance, probably Saudi Arabia faces much greater threats than Qatar does in the coming few years. I fully accept and agree that Mohammed bin Salman has a very good reform program, and it is a reform program that is badly needed, but it is a reform program that has not been pursued or implemented in the most logical way. In fact, if the Saudis are successful in what they're trying to do today, then at best they produce a Qatar. What they're looking to do is to achieve what the Qataris have achieved in terms of balancing conservatism and liberal economics, in terms of focusing on industry, diversifying their economy and so on. So I don't think any of the Gulf countries will come out of this crisis victorious. And certainly talking about any one of them disappearing altogether is not the case.
Okay.
What is on the table is the possibility of upheaval in the region as a whole because of the tension that is growing with Iran. And the most logical reaction from Saudi Arabia would be to consolidate the Gulf front. So it's about, instead of dividing it,
so Sultan,
we should really try to bring them together to stand up for Iran.
Okay, so Ahmed, given the tensions with Iran, now that the US has pulled out of the Iran deal as well, doesn't it make more sense diplomatically to have a country like Qatar involved at the table who can be a conduit or some sort of mediator when it comes to the GCC countries, the Iranians and everybody else? Why all the division? Why not use the Qataris and their leverage?
Well, we have a traditional negotiator from the GCC country and the Sultanate Oman. Again, Qatar is much thinner than what everybody thinks. I'm surprised by what your guest said, Mr. Sultan. I think if you check with the Trends Research Center in Bruxelles, they're going to give you all the data of how many millions and billions of dollars that Qatar actually have gave to the terrorist organization like the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. I mean, look, when we start the blockade, like the first week, 10 days, ISIS has went to a shattered pieces. Let's not forget the money that they gave to the royal family
Ahmed,
to free them from Iraq.
You can't seriously,
and all that went.
Certainly,
so anyway,
you can't honestly say there's a correlation between the blockade and ISIS losing power. There's absolutely no data to show that Qatar, the blockade on Qatar and ISIS losing land and power.
The link between Qatar. Fine. Check with Al-Shabaab in Somal. See how many hundreds of millions has Qatar gave to those Al-Shabaab terrorist organization. Look at all the secret meetings that happens in Turkey between the Qataris and the counterparts to fund all these terrorist groups secretly. All these are on the record. It's not with Saudi Arabia, it's not with me, it's not with the four countries who did the blockade. All you have to do, go to the research center and send the record. Now, if your heart on the side of Qatar, this is something that I cannot control. But again, we have Sultanate Oman. They are the traditional mediator between us and between Iran. Iran, it is a problem with Iran. Iran is a way that we are trying to do it through the international community, through our traditional ally, which is the United States. We would like to come to a peace in the region. Qatar, through all the time that they were with us in the GCC, one of the mandates that the GCC countries signed that we don't have a relationship with our enemy that actually destabilized the region. And we found that half of the resolution of the GCC countries being passed to the Revolutionary Guard and to the country. So Qatar, it won't help at this stage.
Okay, I got to move on. Sultan, Ahmed, I thank you both for joining us here on The Newsmakers. We've got to move on, unfortunately. Still to come, Jordan's Prime Minister resigns, but mass protests continue. Will the king give in to the demonstrators' demands? And Taiwan loses another one of its few remaining allies. Is China or Taiwan's president to blame for the island's isolation? They're Jordan's biggest protests in years, and after days of demonstrations, the Prime Minister was forced to resign. But the protests haven't come to an end. Thousands are still angry at the government's proposed tax hikes. They may be backed by the IMF, but those on the streets say they simply target those already struggling to make ends meet. Jordan's King Abdullah has promised he'll make changes, but will they be enough to end the unrest?
To be honest, the citizens can't handle the economic burdens of those who were bearing them before. We're not the people who should pay the tax of the IMF and the debts this country is handing on to the shoulders of its people. As you can see, people are protesting and opposing the decisions.
The resignation is a first step to reduce the tension that exists in the country. The second step, which is the main step, is to withdraw the decision by King Abdullah from the parliament and cancel it. Otherwise, things will not get calm.
Well, joining me now from Amman is Jawad Al-Hani. He served as both Jordan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. And in Amman, we have as well Rana Swais. She's a journalist and author of the upcoming book, Voices of Jordan. I thank you both for joining us. Rana, let me begin with you. The Prime Minister stepping down, is that going to be enough to satisfy the protesters?
I think the protests started because, and the labor strikes as well, because they wanted the new tax law to be revoked. So this will not stop until the tax law is revoked. And as well, they are asking for a change in terms of economic policies and social policies, as well as some of them calling for a new way of elections and political reform as well. So I don't think the buck stops there, but we'll have to see. I think the new Prime Minister is a good choice, but we'll have to see if what happens with the tax law.
Yeah, tough job ahead for Omar Al-Razzaz, and I'm going to ask you about him in a moment. But Jawad Al-Hani, just looking at the general policy, looking at the proposed tax law and the general economic policy, has it been a failure?
Well, it has not delivered the goodies, as you might say, following the IMF brokered formula, has not produced neither the fiscal reform that had been desired or targeted, nor has it actually achieved economic growth. So in a way, we have been getting the worst of the two worlds. Right now, we have to focus on economic development and growth, because this is the only way to increase GDP, and automatically, if we follow a rational fiscal policy, the debt GDP ratio would fall down. So therefore, I think we need a new direction and a new approach with focus on pro-people development.
Yes, and Sir, Mr. Al-Hani, Hani al-Mulki stepped down. Was he really responsible for these policies? Did the right person step down?
Well, actually, he became a firm believer in what he was trying to pitch for the people. But unfortunately, his ability and his members of the cabinet failed to communicate, and they were not even able to convince the people of some of the good points in the proposed income tax law. So therefore, I think the lack of communication, lack of engaging public opinion effectively, looking down at people and at the probability that such protestations would proliferate into the effective form they had taken, actually he paid the price for not heeding all that.
Yeah, looking down on people. Interesting point there, Rana, which begs the question, do people also want more political freedom? Yes, Jordan is more progressive compared to a lot of countries in the region, but are they also protesting because they want more political freedom and democracy?
Yeah, basically the protests began about economics, but basically this is about pent-up grievances, bad governance and failed economic policies, and the need for urgent political reform. So we're at a crossroads really. And, how we move forward will be crucial. People are asking, for their voices to be heard, to be involved in decisions. Really, the government has a lot of work to do to gain the trust of the people again.
Right. Jawad Al-Hani, does King Abdullah understand what is needed? Does he get it?
Well, yeah, the two messages that he sent in the last 2 days have been very much encouraging. He has taken an all-embracive approach, a comprehensive approach to resolving the problem. First of all, when he addressed the media moguls in the country, he was very firm. there was a degree of self-criticism and evaluation, and he promised that change. He will probably abide to his constitutional duties of being an arbiter among the different authorities in the country without actually interfering directly into the work of the government. So I think this is a very big improvement and a step forward on his part. Secondly, when he charted the objectives, he talked about the need for political as well as public sector reform. And these are essential ingredients for the future, because the Jordanian citizen is paying so much for government, for a very expensive government, that needs to be made more effective and efficient. And at the same time, we're paying too much salaries. The Minister of Finance has to produce at the end of every month something like $350 billion for $50 billion in salaries. That compared to Jordan's capacity and population, that is considered a very high burden. So therefore, we need to redefine the relation between public and private sectors. We need to define the social contract that bind us horizontally and vertically. And I think he had called for reform in all these points. It is a very tall order for the new government, but I hope that they would send right from the beginning the right signals to the people that they are going to do the right thing and follow the right procedure.
Right. Rana, looking at the people protesting, it's as broad as you get. You have Hirak Shababi driving it, but more than 30 professional associations, civil society groups, others unaffiliated joining the protest. Are they going to trust Omar al-Razaz to actually try and make a difference? Are they going to give the new Prime Minister or the caretaker Prime Minister the time he needs in order to make fixes?
Well, people in Jordan, the youth that you see on the street, the diverse group of people, taxi drivers, doctors, Bedouins, techies, all these people, women, you're talking about a very educated youth in Jordan who, have smartphones, who are politically savvy. They know that we've had many changes of prime ministers and cabinet, and this has not moved Jordan forward. So they're going to be waiting to see if there's a change in the way that the system performs, and that Omar Razaz, the new prime minister, will have the authority to actually implement the reforms that have been asked of him, and that the people will, in the cabinet and others up in the government, will move forward with
right.
Him, and that including the security services, that everyone will move forward and implement the reforms that are needed.
Okay, and then my last question is to Jawad Annani. We have Rana saying that people will be questioning, will he have the authority to implement these reforms? As somebody who was within the system, tell me what will be the stumbling blocks? What will be the challenges to him implementing those reforms?
Well, first of all, he has to organize and manage very well, the reforms that he's going to take. He has to separate the short term, the doable things in the short term, and also he has to send signals that he has started working on the core issues. The first thing he should do, I think, is to withdraw the income tax law project from the parliament and work on complete fiscal reform. Secondly, his choice of ministers is going to judge him. Even Superman, even if Dr. Razaz was a Superman is Clark Kent most of the time. So in a way, he has to use the right people with him, people who are street savvy, people who are street smart, who not only understand the task that lies ahead, but also who can engage the public in dialogue and be convincing. Thirdly, as was said before, I think that we need a new election law that would reflect the will of the people and would encourage young people, especially to engage young people in the society, who constitute more than half of the population, almost 62% of the population, engage them in a very active and proactive process that will enable them to contribute to the society, and at the same time let their voice be heard, and heard quite loudly and clearly, so that we can heed their demands and understand what they are after, and also accommodate their ambitions.
Right. Okay. Yeah, certainly. Okay, you both have brought a lot of clarity to what's happening on the streets in Jordan and in the corridors of power. We don't get to cover Jordan very often, so I thank you both for joining us, Jawad Anani and Rana Suez. Be well. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Taiwan has its own elected government, its own flag and its own military. Yet only 18 nations recognize it as a country, and that number keeps falling. Last month, Burkina Faso became the latest to sever diplomatic ties, the second in less than a month. Taiwan has placed the blame firmly on China. Relations between the two seem to have worsened since Tsai Ing-wen came to power. China is wary the Taiwanese president is keen on formal independence. So is Beijing sparing no expense to make sure that doesn't happen? Here's Natalie Pohernan.
The island state of Taiwan is fast finding itself with fewer diplomatic allies. At the start of May, it had official relations with 20 nations, but that's now dropped to 18. The self-ruled island is claimed by Beijing as a Chinese territory. Beijing refuses formal ties with nations that recognize Taiwan, but it has been on a mission to win them over. The latest ally to shift allegiances from Taipei to Beijing is Burkina Faso, after more than 2 decades of friendship.
From now on, Burkina Faso recognises only one united China, and this decision has been taken independently with full sovereignty.
I believe that in the historical process of China achieving its complete unification, all our brothers in Africa will firmly stand together with us.
The Taiwanese government has accused Beijing of using checkbook diplomacy to lure away its allies.
I want to make a point here. China's snatching our diplomatic allies and suppressing Taiwan's diplomacy will not bring our countries closer, nor take our relations towards peace and friendliness.
But Beijing's foreign policy maneuvers are isolating Taiwan and placing further political pressure on the island and its president. Tsai Ing-wen became Taiwan's first female president in 2016. Her success at the ballot box with the pro-independence party also signalled a change in relations between Taipei and Beijing. Tsai had pledged to maintain peace with Beijing, but unlike her predecessors, she has not acknowledged that there is only one China. In response, Beijing has ramped up military drills around the island and continues to exert pressure to reduce Taiwan's diplomatic footprint.
我要告诉国人同胞，中国的这些去我国主权化的蛮横的作为，已经挑战台湾社会的底线，我们不会再忍让。
The Chinese government says foreign companies must stick to the One China principle, and if they don't, it's making them say sorry. Here are some companies which have apologized to China this year. Marriott had a customer survey listing Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong and Macau as countries. The hotel chain's Chinese sites were blocked for a week. Gap got in trouble for producing a t-shirt which left out Taiwan from a map of China. Japanese firm Muji sent coat hangers to China with a packaging label Country of Origin, Taiwan. It was fined $31,000. And some organisations don't want to find themselves in a diplomatic dispute in the first place. A small Australian council censored a public art project involving a bull statue. Students painted 2 Taiwanese flags on it. The council painted over them to avoid a problem. The aviation regulator gave dozens of international airlines a May deadline to remove any references which could suggest Taiwan, Hong Kong or Macau are independent. The White House called it Orwellian nonsense and part of a growing trend by the Chinese Communist Party to impose its political views on American citizens and private companies. But Beijing isn't backing down from these kinds of directives because the One China principle seems an indivisible part of modern China. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to debate that, I'm joined now by Melissa Newcomb. She's a research manager at the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington. And in Beijing, we have Victor Gao. He's a political analyst who specializes in Chinese affairs, as well as the director of the China National Association of International Studies. Thanks so much for joining us. Melissa, let's look at who Taiwan's friends are. It's down to fewer than 20. It's at 18 now. There's a lot of Chinese pressure. Burkina Faso and Dominican Republic have left the WhatsApp group. It's going to be impossible for Taiwan to retain any friends, right?
Well, I wouldn't say it's impossible. And first of all, thank you for having me again on the show. I will say that if we're talking sheer dollar numbers, there is no way that Taiwan could compete if China is continuing their checkbook diplomacy, a very old strategy that they've been using since the 50s. But the partners that Taiwan has that value more than money are happy to stay with Taiwan. Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, for instance, has recently come out saying that they are not changing their diplomatic relations despite the courtship from Beijing.
Victor Gao, will China ever accept Taiwan as an independent nation?
No, definitely not. There is only one China, and the People's Republic of China is the sole legitimate representative of China. Yes, indeed, there are 18 countries in the world which still recognize Taiwan or the Republic of China, but I think everyone knows the megatrend, and I think once the Vatican signs up with People's Republic of China and severs the diplomatic relations with the Republic of China or Taiwan, then more countries will follow suit. So don't be surprised if there will be more countries switching to China or the People's Republic of China. And I would say, from the mainland Chinese perspective, there is no problem for Taiwan to maintain good economic, trading, and cultural relations with all the countries in the world. What China objects is any country recognizing Taiwan or the Republic of China as the sole representative of China. And this is all because of the bitter civil war which was brought to an end more or less, or at least in mainland China in 1949. And ever since, this separation of mainland China versus Taiwan has been in the situation, and eventually I think this situation needs to be overcome, and there will be one China after all.
Okay, so talking about overcoming the situation, Melissa, if China continues to be frustrated by checkbook diplomacy, if we see more and more nationalist or independence fervor on the island of Taiwan, is there an inevitability to Taiwan being gobbled up by China within the next few decades?
I don't like to speak in terms of inevitability. It's definitely certain that the PRC would like to unify with Taiwan. But I think the PRC is miscalculating on how it will do so without full force if they continue to be so aggressive towards Taiwan as it is now, an autonomous region, country, depending on who you ask. People in Taiwan would say that they live in a country. And if they could no longer be, quote unquote, the Republic of China, that's a possibility that people in Taiwan would like to entertain if it didn't lead to confrontation. People in Taiwan actually don't want confrontation. They don't want war. They want peace. They want stability in the region. And President Tsai has said that herself. So if there's any inevitability, it will be coming from the PRC being an aggressor and changing the status quo in the region. To Victor's point about the fact that people in Taiwan can still enjoy trade and exchange regardless of national status, that's something that Taiwan has been doing since the 1970s and would like to continue to do so, but finds itself blocked even when it's participating as an NGO, when its philanthropists are trying to go abroad, they're blocked because of Chinese interference. What Victor's saying simply isn't true in practice. If the PRC really had good intentions towards the people of Taiwan to continue despite a lack of normal statehood, they would be letting them participate in ICAO, they'd be letting them participate in the WHA, but they simply are not. What they're saying, their deeds, don't match up with their actions.
Okay, so Victor, what China's saying and their deeds don't match up, according to Melissa. If you wanted them to thrive, you would have let them thrive.
No, I don't think so. I think when former President Ma Ying-jeou was the leader of Taiwan, relations between mainland China and Taiwan were more or less more manageable. However, ever since Ms. Tsai Ing-wen became the president in Taiwan, relations became more and more strained. And the main reason is because Tsai Ing-wen and her political party do not want to recognize there is only one China, and the two sides of the Taiwan Strait need to work together to eventually achieve the one China status quo, for example. And Tsai Ing-wen even takes the risks of moving further and further away from this one China policy. And I think this puts a lot of pressure on mainland Chinese government, and the more recent flurry of other countries switching from Taiwan to PRC is an indication that more and more countries are fed up with this particular situation. They, of course, want to have better relations with the largest trading nation in the world, the largest manufacturing country in the world, and the second largest economy in the world. All this makes a lot of sense. And I would say Vatican will be a very important landmark event. I understand the PRC government and Vatican have been talking with each other for several years, and the critical moment will come very soon.
Yeah, we're watching that very closely. Melissa, what do you make of Tsai Ing-wen's strategy to try and counter what China is doing? So we see Dominican Republic go China's way, and then we see Taiwan reach out to Haiti just across the border, offering them aid and trade and reconstruction funds and so forth. Is it just symbolic? I mean, clearly kind of pound for pound, dollar for dollar, as you mentioned. Taiwan can't compete. So will Taiwan just take these little victories as they go along as mere symbolic moments of pride?
Well, I think that if you look at how Taiwan actually works with its partners in Latin America and the remaining regions in the world, Taiwan actually contributes very substantively to the people's health, to the general population's well-being. They offer scholarships. It's not just about dollar for dollar. That's what China offers. That's what Beijing offers. Taiwan offers real substantive help, development, really growing infrastructure for these countries that benefits the majority of people, not just the elites who receive the dollars from Beijing. So I think that Tsai Ing-wen's strategy towards Beijing these days is to simply hold the line, to not be an aggressor, to try to keep the peace, and to try to protect the democracy and the human rights of her citizens. Since her inauguration, she has not accepted the 1992 consensus. I think that's what Victor Gao is kind of alluding to, but she has acknowledged its historical significance in keeping the peace across the strait. And I think that the DPP and Tsai Ing-wen herself would be very interested in maybe opening dialogue again with Beijing. It was Beijing that cut off dialogue. It's been Beijing that restarted the checkbook diplomacy ever since she was elected for no reason other than her refusal to wholeheartedly accept the 1992 consensus without any further discussion or sort of renewal. It's been so many years. How can a new president simply accept an old policy formulated before she was in power? So I think it's a little unfair to say that Taiwan's been in any way the cause for these poor relations across the strait, and the sudden renewal of countries flowing to China is because China's opened up the checkbook again. They had it closed. We can't fault these less developed countries for going where they can receive the maximum benefit for themselves. Anyone would do that. And I don't think Taiwan is ignorant to that fact. I think that they just will try to continue working with their unofficial partners, such as the United States or Japan, and working with their official partners in the most meaningful way possible.
Victor, very finally, do you accept that you can learn a lot from them? They're better at democracy, they're better at human rights, they're better at substantive development in countries that don't have much. Is that a fair point? Could China learn from them?
Fundamentally, people in mainland China and people in Taiwan are of the same origin, same civilization, same culture. We are brothers and sisters. We do not want to have a war. We want to have peaceful reunification. We want to embrace each other, as the Koreans are doing, as the Germans are doing. And we can learn a lot from our brothers and sisters in Taiwan. We benefited a lot by working closely with our brothers and sisters in Taiwan. And I think the mega trend is here. There is only one China. Eventually there will be unification, and peaceful unification is much better than anything non-peaceful. And let's work together to achieve eventually the peaceful reunification of China.
Okay, Victor Gao and Melissa Newcomb, I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
I don't think it will ever get cleaned. The conditions will never improve because no one is serious about this problem, not even the locals.
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.